Well, we only thought that it would happen in the United States, but clearly it is happening here as well, particularly under the Scott Morrison government, it appears. There is new information that indicates that Scott Morrison behaved in ways which are very Trumpism or Trumpist when one thinks about it, and that is in relation to him secretly swearing himself in as a minister of a number of portfolios and not letting anybody know that he had done so. Now, what this is an indication that Scott Morrison was a man completely out of control who clearly wanted to be able to have as much influence as he could over all the portfolios that seemed to matter to him. In Australia, under the Westminster system, each minister has a responsibility for their ministry and their portfolio. This means that they are enabled to make decisions in relation to those portfolios that are in the best interest of the community as a whole. It doesn't mean, though, that they go to the Prime Minister to get verification or an agreement on some of the decisions that they make. There are too many decisions for that to happen. As in the United States, where it seems to me that the President seems to be responsible for almost everything and often makes decisions independent of their Secretaries of State or whatever the case might be. In Australia, though, it's different. Each minister has responsibility to be able to make decisions relating to their specific portfolio. Now, Scott Morrison clearly decided that he was the sole arbiter of whatever decisions needed to be made, and he therefore chose to do just that by swearing himself in as a minister for certain portfolios, and there's a whole range of them, apparently. Now, there's a debate going on here as to whether that's legal or not, and I think some people are basically saying that there's no real legality involved, even though there's a degree of precedent, obviously, as to how we do things under our system. Now, there is an interesting article that's come out in many newspapers, but I'm going to quote here, particularly from the Advertiser, and I'm going to show you Albanese's response, our current Prime Minister, for those that are overseas, about what has happened, and let's see whether we can get some sort of sense as to where this stands for all of us. So here's Anthony Albanese.
Well, this is extraordinary and unprecedented. And I've asked when I return back to Canberra, I flew down from Canberra this morning. When I return this afternoon, I'll be having briefings with the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet who are seeking advice on this. Let's be very clear. Australians knew during the election campaign that I was running a shadow ministry. What they didn't know was that Scott Morrison was running a shadow government that was operating in the shadows. What we have when we get sworn in as ministers is that there's some transparency there. A whole lot of questions arise from this. What did Peter Dutton and other continuing members of the now shadow ministry know about these circumstances? How is it that the Australian people can be misled, whereby we know now that Scott Morrison was not only being Prime Minister, but was Minister for Health, was Minister for Industry and Science at the same time as Resources, was the Minister for Finance. And we have the extraordinary revelation that Matthias Cormann apparently wasn't aware that Scott Morrison was the Minister for Finance as well as himself. We all know that Scott Morrison had trouble doing the job that he had. Perhaps it was because he was doing so many different jobs that we didn't know that he had. In Australia, we have a Westminster system of government that produces accountability. This is a sort of tin pot activity that we would ridicule if it was in a non-democratic country. Here in Parliament, I, as leader of my party, and the Peter Dutton now, but Scott Morrison as the former leader of the country, would table the list of ministers. That is not some academic exercise. That is so that people can be held accountable. And how is it that the Governor-General could swear in Scott Morrison into ministerial portfolios without there being a transparency there about that process? This is quite extraordinary. Australians need a Prime Minister who's focused on the job that they're given. Nothing about the last government was real.
And I think one of the issues here is that this is not about any sense of criminality, but it is about a government that was being run by an individual who seemed to think that perhaps he needed to control everything. Now, what I guess this means is that we need to find ways by which we can start to focus on making sure that these sorts of issues do not arise in the future, and that we fill the gap so that this doesn't reoccur. Now, the article in the Advertiser says on March 2020, the former Prime Minister was sworn in as second Health Minister and second Finance Minister, with the move never made public even to his colleagues. Now, one can sort of wonder about, why is that? Why wouldn't you even let those people that were the closest to you, fellow colleagues and other ministers, know what it is that you're doing? And that they talked about the Westminster system. Let's be very clear, Australians knew during the election campaign that I was running a shadow ministry. What they didn't know was that Scott Morrison was running a shadow government. And I think that's the whole point. And it goes on to talk about all that stuff we've just heard about. The news revealed on Sunday the former Prime Minister swore himself in as Resources Minister and ultimately used the power to roll his own frontbencher Keith Pitt over a plan to drill for gas at the New South Wales coast. Mr. Pitt has told colleagues he was kept in the dark and shocked to learn of the Prime Minister's secret powers during discussions with him and his office in late 2021 over the controversial oil and gas project. Mr. Pitt wanted to move ahead with approvals. Mr. Morrison did not. And that contravenes the general understanding that we have in relation to ministers in this country, and that the ministers do have control over their portfolios independent of a Prime Minister. That multiple former cabinet ministers have told news.com.au they either didn't understand why it has been done or objected to it. The problem with Scott is he had his grandiose view of himself, one former minister said. And I think that basically this is primarily the issue, that ultimately we need to keep a check on our Prime Minister. We need to make sure that we're completely transparent and that we don't enter into the realm of Trumpism, whereby one particular person who has a narcissistic and sociopathic view of themselves and the world do not take over and control everything. And that's an important lesson for us to learn here in Australia. So the question for me is Scomo's world was entering into a Trumpist view of the world, and hopefully we have learnt from the lessons in the United States, and we will ensure that that never, ever happens here in Australia. Thanks for being with me, everybody. Take care. And I'd just like to remind people to subscribe to my channel and to ring the bell so that you can receive future notifications. I'd really appreciate that. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Look after yourselves. And more importantly, be safe.